Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, Napoleon Bonaparte. The end of the Great Conquerors.
Alexander the Great, buried alive or worshipped as a god. Alexander stares across the moonlit Hydaspes River, rain mixing with the sweat of men who have marched 10 years for him. The sky rumbles like a giant bronze shield, but his eyes burn. Brighter than the lightning, he has already carved 2 million square miles into a single empire. Yet tonight, he is restless. Conquest, not rule, is his only drug, and the dose must keep rising. Behind him, veterans whisper about wives they have not seen in a decade, about gold collecting dust in panniers instead of glittering on tables back home. Alexander hears it all and ignores it. Tomorrow, he will attack King Porus on unfamiliar soil, because the idea of stopping feels like death. Dawn breaks. War elephants scream. Macedonian horses rear. Bronze meets iron in a storm of arrows. The king's beloved stallion, Bucephalus, crumples beneath a spear. Alexander keeps fighting, on foot, ankle-deep in blood-soaked mud, until the river runs red and victory tastes like metal. But even he can see what comes next. Another Indian army waits, fresh and eager, beyond the next crossing. His men, gaunt and fever-struck, refuse to move. When he finally raises a trembling hand and orders the retreat, the invincible illusion cracks and a new enemy slips in through the fracture, his own mortality. Back in Babylon, he tries to drown frustration in a bowl of unmixed wine. Cup after cup, the liquid burns hotter than any Persian sun. Before dawn, he collapses, burning with a fever no healer can name. As sweat soaks the royal sheets, opportunist generals gather like vultures. Who inherits the world? They ask. Alexander's eyelids flutter. His voice is a rasp. To the strongest, the answer is gasoline on dry wood. Somewhere outside the door, soldiers slip hands to sword hilts and weigh futures measured in provinces. What no one sees is the king's pupils tracking every scheming face because his body is paralyzed, not dead. Modern scholars will call it Guillain-Barré or West Nile. The court physicians call it a miracle that the corpse does not rot. 6 days of sacred stillness persuade them he was half god in life. They do not realize the gods are listening to their plans, trapped inside a flesh cage that no longer answers commands. When the funeral procession finally rolls out, jeweled wheels grinding over sun-baked streets, some swear they hear fingernails on the inside of the sarcophagus. The empire he forged with sword and wildfire shatters in under a generation. Ptolemy grabs Egypt, Seleucus the east, Antigonus the heartland. None remember that their greatest trophy might still be breathing under layers of resin and myth. Legends soon replace facts, that his body glowed, that lions guarded his tomb, that rain never fell on his coffin. Yet one whisper refuses to die, that Alexander died wanting more, so the universe sealed him alive with the one thing he could never conquer: time. Centuries later, tourists snap photos beside broken marble that once bore his name. They marvel at empires that rose, fell, and fossilized in the desert. But if you press your ear to the dust, you might still hear the faint rattle of a restless king, tapping on the lid of history, begging for one last campaign. Julius Caesar, the man who broke Rome to rule forever. Julius Caesar sat in silence, his eyes locked on the scrolls of Alexander the Great. At this very age, Alexander had conquered Persia. Caesar? He had done nothing. That night, something inside him cracked. He wouldn't die forgotten. He would make the world remember his name. He stepped into politics, not with promises, but with force. As a general, he was brilliant. As a politician, dangerous. He conquered Gaul, built unshakable loyalty among his soldiers, and returned not as a servant of Rome, but as a master. The Senate saw it coming. They whispered in corridors, watching the rise of a man who believed he was destiny itself. And when they told him to return to Rome without his army, they made their biggest mistake. He crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, a silent declaration of war, and no turning back. Rome belonged to him now. He swept aside resistance, seized power, and declared himself dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. His words echoed through marble halls. If you must break the law, do it to seize power. In all other cases, observe it. He rewrote Rome, gave bread to the hungry, laws to the poor, and silence to his enemies. Some called it reform. Others called it tyranny wrapped in gold. But in the shadows, the knives were already being sharpened. On March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March, he walked into the Senate like he had done so many times before. Except this time, the Senate did not rise to greet him. 60 men surrounded him. 60 senators with guilt in their hearts and daggers in their robes. The first blade pierced his back. The second, his shoulder. He turned eyes wide and saw the final face. The face that broke him, Marcus Brutus, his closest ally, his adopted son. Et tu, Brute? He whispered. Even you? He collapsed beneath the statue of Pompey, his former rival. A cruel joke by fate. A general killed not in war, but by politics. Stabbed 23 times. Betrayed by the very system he tried to fix. But Caesar's death didn't bring peace. It brought chaos. Rome bled. Civil wars erupted. Friend turned on friend. And in the end, the republic that killed him, killed itself. They had ended Caesar, but not his legacy. His name outlived every assassin. Caesar became more than a man, it became a title. Kaiser in Germany, Tsar in Russia, Emperor across empires, all inspired by a man who once cried, because he thought he hadn't done enough. Genghis Khan, the tyrant who conquered the world but hid his own death. They called him the Beast of the East, a man born into betrayal, raised in exile, and forged by vengeance. His name was Temujin. The world would remember him as Genghis Khan. Throne, no royal blood, just rage and strategy. Where Alexander sought glory, where Caesar craved power, Genghis Khan wanted domination, nothing else. He united the Mongol tribes not through peace, but by fire. Either swear loyalty or be erased. From the steppe, there was no middle ground, and those who thought mercy might follow learned otherwise. He rode like thunder across Asia. Cities were reduced to ash, armies scattered like sand. Women, children, kings, it didn't matter. His empire grew like a plague, swift, brutal, unstoppable. But Genghis didn't pretend to be a god. He didn't dress in golden robes or speak in riddles. He told you exactly who he was. The greatest happiness, he once said, is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the weeping of their women. This wasn't cruelty. This was policy. Terror was his weapon, and it worked. He conquered more land than any man in history, more than Alexander, more than Napoleon. From China to the Caspian Sea, the world knelt before the hooves of the Mongol horses. But then, something changed in the middle of the campaign against the Western Xia. Something happened. Something no one saw coming. The man who conquered the world vanished. There are no death mosques, no royal funerals, no parades of mourning. Why? Because his death was hidden. One version says the bubonic plague struck him down. Another says he was shot by an arrow and died of the wound. A darker tale claims a princess he took captive castrated him. Fatalino one knows the truth, because he never wanted the world to know. As he lay dying, he ordered his followers to keep it a secret at any cost, even in death. Conquest was more important than legacy. His body was carried home in silence. Every man who saw the procession, killed. Every witness along the road, silenced. His grave, still unknown, buried beneath the earth, perhaps under a river, lost, just like he planned. They say the earth trembled when he died, but the world never found out. And yet, centuries later, his shadow still looms. 1 out of every 200 men today carries his DNA, not a myth, not a legend. A conqueror whose power still pulses through blood. He ruled by fear. He died in silence. And his story still whispers through the dust of empires. Napoleon, the artist of war who died in a rotten bungalow. They feared him, they followed him, some worshipped him, others cursed his name. He was not born a king, but he carved his crown through chaos. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who rewrote war itself in an age where kings ruled with bloodlines. Napoleon ruled with brilliance. He didn't inherit power, he outsmarted it. He called himself not a warrior but an artist, and war. That was his canvas. "I love power," he once said. "But it is as an artist that I love it." He didn't just fight battles, he choreographed them, like thunder on command. His armies moved in perfect rhythm, 20 million men across 7 corps all memorized. Inside his head, he saw through fog what others missed in maps. He knew where a man would camp before that man even decided. His battlefield wasn't just terrain, it was theater, and Napoleon always played the lead. But behind the genius was madness. He crowned himself emperor, right in front of the Pope. He believed France was destiny, and he was its sword. Europe trembled as he marched. From Austria to Egypt, from Italy to Spain, he crushed empires like glass under boots. Victories piled up, so did bodies. The world watched, and finally, it fought back. Russia was the turning point. 1,000-mile gamble, frozen roads, starving men, and a war he could not paint to perfection. The retreat from Moscow wasn't a defeat, it was a disaster, and the myth of invincibility shattered. But Napoleon didn't stop. He returned, he rebuilt, and then came Waterloo, a single name, a final stand. 1815. He was defeated, but they didn't kill him. The British feared he'd become a martyr. So they exiled him to die slowly, forgotten. A damp, decaying bungalow on a lonely island. Helena, the man who once controlled continents, now begged for news, visitors, a purpose. He held dinner parties where men wore uniforms and women wore gowns as if they were still in Paris, but there was no glory, no crown. Just silence. Years passed. The world moved on. And on May 5, 1821, Napoleon whispered his last words. France. The army. The head of the army, Josephine. He died as he lived, obsessed with conquest, love, and power. A prisoner in a rotting palace of memory. But death didn't erase him, it immortalized him. Statues rose. Books were written. Movies filmed. And military schools still study the man who saw war as art. Napoleon didn't just shape history, he sculpted it. And though he died in isolation, his shadow still commands attention. Because some conquerors rule with swords, but the greatest, they rule with vision. And Napoleon never stopped drawing his masterpiece. History remembers the battles, but it never forgets the men who dreamed beyond their time. Napoleon died alone, but his ambition still echoes across centuries. What do you think made him unforgettable, his victories or his downfall? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this was just one chapter. We've got more untold legends waiting to be revealed. This is HistoriSync, where history connects with you. See you in the next one.